I'll be putting up more online things as time goes on. In fact, I'll probably report a couple tonight. One of the things I wanted to mention before we get started here is that this is Ethics Awareness Week this week, and some of you know about this because you're helping us out. You've probably seen things on campus. Every year, the Ethics Awareness Week takes on a different theme. I believe last year was immigration. This year is the ethics of art. And I made a couple of announcements, I think, a week ago, but I wanted to reiterate it. There was a panel discussion yesterday morning that I chaired with Marguerite Rippey and Holly Carr-Pitkova about social responsibility of the artist. Tonight there's a movie at 7 o'clock in Ranch Auditorium on a documentary on Ai Weiwei, the Chinese dissident artist who has been arrested for his art. It most recently made news for posing as the poor Syrian refugee washed up on the coast, right? But he's very much an activist artist, part performance art, part sculpture. And there was a movie he made about 2 years ago called Never Sorry that they're screening tonight, and Professor Hicks will be running a bit of a Q&A afterwards, sort of open some of the issues involved. So that's 7 tonight at Ranch. I believe many of these things have nipples as well to entice people to go. But they're really there for you and not me. I bet I do plan to be there tonight. Tomorrow, Wednesday, at 5, from 5 to 7, just in advance of the volleyball game, is something that they're calling Artscape, which is in the atrium outside of the Legion, right near Bernie's there. They're going to have a series of tables set up for different departments that are doing art-related projects and with some ethical dimension. The art department has 3 different tables. One of them is our seniors, Brianna and Demetrius, and this class will be talking about their senior projects, plus 2 other people, Maggie Brewer and Maura McCandlish will be talking about their things as well. So they're going to actually have their works there to talk about, maybe not the entire thing, but parts of it, right? And in an informal way, talk about their work. So, come and support your classmates. And if you go to 3 different tables, you get in the drawing for a Kindle, I think, or a Nook or something, some sort of e-reader, right? Free e-reader they're giving away. So the other 2 tables that we have is Chris Haggerty, her printmaking class is doing a printmaking quilt. They may be assembling it there. I don't know how far along you guys are on that. You've already done it? Yeah, so it's been stitched? Excellent. I heard Chris was worried yesterday. It hasn't stitched together yet. So they'll be presenting that. And the third thing is this little printmaking thing. We're going to make Marymount logos and stuff out of woodblock prints or litho prints as well. In addition to that, numerous other departments are the film club will be there talking about the film annual film festival, taking up the idea of ethics this year as well. There's be some gaming things going on from the economics department, I think, or something like that. So lots of different things tomorrow. It's 5 to 7 outside the Lee Gym in the atrium there. Tomorrow, 5 o'clock. Tonight is the Ai Weiwei film. Thursday morning, either leaving campus at 9:30 or meeting at the National Gallery at 10. I'm going to be taking a religious studies class down to look at American landscape painting and the idea that you guys know this, that the American West was the promised land. That theme with Bierstadt and Thomas Edwin Church, Frederick Edwin Church, Jasper Cropsey and that crowd, Thomas Cole. So I'll be leaving them down there at the National Gallery at 10, leaving here at 9:30. Finally, Thursday night, the Economics Department has a film as well, and I believe it's in Rowley G127. But you can find these things all over. They're on the bark and all of that. Which is it's called Poverty Inc. It's another documentary that addresses the question of public support programs and their efficiency. So that's it. Finally, Friday morning at 10, I think I'm doing this. Me or Joe or Boston Brian Doyle from Religious Studies, who's kind of the supervisor of all this, are going to be talking about sort of what have we learned from the week before. This is an art class. It's all about ethics and the arts, and not just fine art, right? Not just painting and sculpture, but all of the arts. So really, I encourage you very much to get out. And if you need more information on any of this, just email me, right? You can use Blackboard to email me, and I'll get back to you on that, right? The other thing I told everybody campus-wide was that they could come to any of the art classes they wanted to come to. And so I was sort of saying this as well, thinking that maybe somebody would walk through the door and want to hear about Kirchner, because he does have kind of a social agenda, right? And that's why I said it, today and Friday we're talking about German expressionists and their social agenda. And that said, let's get into it, right? We were talking about Ernst Ludwig Kirchner working in Dresden, and this idea he had of using art to shake us out of our complacency in the everyday and get us unsettled enough to begin to see the possibility of things that we might not see otherwise. And in fact, the colors are jarring, but at the same time, he has a fairly recognizable palette. You can see that the side of that house is very similar to the highlight colors on the legs of our two nudes over here. The reds repeat, the oranges repeat, the yellows too. It's a fairly limited palette, isn't it? I mean, as bright as it is, you start to pick up recognizable colors around this time in his works. Those hot paints will reappear as well, like we're seeing in the street. But the idea is to get you unsettled in the everyday so that you start to see it in a new way. And arguably, doesn't all art try to make you see your world in a new way? I mean, isn't that the whole point, right, of making art, is to get people to see things in a different way? But for Kirchner, there's a very particular agenda, and that is that he wants to use a certain brutality of style, a certain savageness of style, in order to get us to recognize that we have evolved from savages, that modern man, beneath the veneer, right, beneath the veneer of our cosmopolitan nature, right, of all of our progress, right, of all of our sophistication, beneath the veneer of that, we're apes. We've evolved from apes. He wants us to recognize that, so part of his shaking us free of this, and part of his using this rather awkward physical stuff that we see in his works very often, is to get us to recognize that beneath the veneer we're still savages. And the point of that is from his interest in contemporary philosophy, particularly Nietzsche. It's this idea that then we can continue to evolve. That if we're complacent with where we've come to, there's no way we're going to keep moving forward. And once we recognize that beneath that veneer we're still savages, then maybe we can continue to evolve past where we are now. And these are Nietzsche's ideas that lead to the idea of the Superman, the Übermensch, which we talked about a week ago, that we can keep evolving. Now, Nietzsche's a fascist. Nietzsche believes only a few people were ever going to evolve that direction. But Kirk is picking up on those ideas. I don't know if Kirk is a fascist. He's a freak. But other than that, I don't know if he's a fascist. He's just kind of egotistical. He writes about himself in the first person. He hates the fact that everybody says that you were indebted to the Fauves in particular. So he started redating his paintings to be earlier than they really were. So people might remember that he influenced the Fauves, which he didn't, right? But he even says that his group, which was called the Bridge, right, the Baruka, bridging back to the savage past, bridging forward to our Superman future, that he wanted that group to be remembered as being unindebted to anyone else artistically. So he sort of fabricated this origin story that says that they started in like 1903, when in fact they started in like 1909 or 1908, so they're much later than the Fauves, but he wanted people to remember them as being the first, right? Kind of cocky and stupid and whatnot, but does that make him a fascist? No, not at all, right? He doesn't believe that certain races are subservient to others, right? So anyway, this is Kierkegaard in a nutshell, right? He is pushing colors in a sort of unrealistic manner, and even his drawing style is not is sort of consciously awkward. In places where the colors are consciously jarring. I think this one is amongst the most beautiful Kierkegaard. I think Kierkegaard is not a beautiful artist. And he raises that issue we talked about a week ago, which is basically, does art have to be beautiful to be brilliant? And he sort of brings that to question. Is it necessary for art to be beautiful? Last night we had a lecture by a visiting scholar from Syracuse as part of this Ethics Awareness Week. And he argued at one point that everybody can agree that art is supposed to be beautiful. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, no, not everybody does agree with that. That sometimes art is supposed to shake you out of your complacency. And Kierkegaard is doing that through these very jarring, super-saturated colors that we see here. This one's from your textbook, and we can see the same use of these really incredibly rich colors applied in, again, a very consciously primitive manner, right? Consciously unschooled, consciously non-academic manner. And if you look, for example, at the face, that's the self-portrait on the left. You look at the face of the artist, not only is the anatomical structure awkward in that sort of triangular shape, coming down to the pointy chin, very wide at the across the eyes, but the colors that he's using to model are also, again, difficult, aren't they? You've got that tangerine yellow, orange for the face, and then those green highlights for the outline around his ears. That is a color combination that's going to hurt you to look at. A lot of Kierkegaard is not easy to look at. Even that robe is sort of the stuff of migraines, isn't it? Stare at that long enough and it's going to burn. You close your eyes and you can see it in the bird throbbing at you. And it's just this way. It's kind of that. It's a robe and he's naked underneath it, right? He's the Superman here. He has sort of taken that Nietzschean idea and said, "That's me," right? I even left this picture out. I've got it in my thing somewhere of him in the studio naked with the naked model, sort of painting him while he's nude too. You want to see it? This is the beauty of bringing my thing in here, right? I can do this. I'll see how easy this is when I'm, okay, let's see. I close that. Okay. And I can do this very quickly here, probably. Control C, doink, Control V, doink, doink, doink. By the way, this is all on tape now, right? So, all the doinks and everything. Come on, baby. Pictures. No. Documents. Art pics. This will tell you why I don't do this just by itself, because there's only art pics, right? Look at this. 20th century Germany. Kierkegaard in the studio. Yeah! Oh my. Well, there you go. That gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. Right? So, there, oh, I'm sorry, you couldn't see all of that. There you are. So, there he is in the studio, visibly painting a model who seems all too pleased to see him, if you get my meaning. Because, back in the day, I will say this, that back in the early 20th century, most models that were hired were prostitutes. Who else is going to sit and take their clothes off for you? And this is true into the 19th century. It was always kind of a bit of a problem. That the idea of a professional model like what we have in our life drawing classes here didn't really exist in these early periods of modern art. And so the person who's there is often also someone who's employed otherwise, because they're people that receive money for services, right? So there's Kierkegaard visibly painting from the model here. And when we look at our picture, you'll notice that it's a beautiful robe. It's really terrific, right? If I had a bathrobe choice, I think that'd be pretty good. But you can tell that with his legs sticking out, his bare feet, right? You can see a little ways up his shin. And his chest, but he's not wearing any clothes underneath that, right? So in many ways, he's almost become like this superhero in a way. Now, this is well before comic book superheroes, the idea of the cape has really nothing to do with it. But what's interesting is that, in many ways, this is almost like the canvas is a mirror, you know? That the point of view that you have in the picture is the point of view from the canvas to the artist painting you, right? Because he's looking, what's he looking at? He's looking at the canvas he's painting, right? And so he steps back from it for a second. So he's there and he's looking at it and he's maybe taking a little bit of a rest between poses, if you will. But, smoking a pipe. What did Freud once say, that sometimes a pipe is just a pipe, right? When he talked about sort of things, objects with sexual references, right? I don't think that's the case here. I think this one isn't just a pipe, you know? I think it relates specifically to that robe he's wearing, the fact that he shows us as being someone who's closer to nature. Sadist, right, underneath it. He's really sort of embodying this entire Die Brücke idea, which is this idea of returning to, reminding us of our primal state, so that we can continue to move forward to become the Superman. It's also kind of an interesting picture in that I think it's kind of a frightening picture as well. Because you'll notice what color he's been painting. Really an incredible blood red, isn't it? And look at this, the color of her ballet slippers. And it's between her feet as well, right? And yeah, it looks like it's dripping on the floor, or at least he's sloshed it around somewhere. This is difficult. Because if you look at her position, you look at how she's posed, with one hand between her legs, and sort of pushing her knees together, there's a sexual erotic undertone to this. That it's almost bordering on like rape illusions, deflowering at least. And if you take into account the fact that she's also a prostitute, the idea of art as sex, right? Which is something actually other artists will pick up on. For the years, there's these Warhol pictures that were painted, it's not sex, but were painted with urine, and other ones was Duchamp's that were painted where the binding agent, the paint was semen. You know, artists began to think about the medium of which they're painting. And the idea that, you're breathing your life onto the canvas to bring it to life. Right? It makes you like God breathing life into Adam. And that idea of giving something of yourself to an inert object that then takes life is itself about siring, isn't it? It's about, for a male artist, fathering, for a female artist, mothering. You know? That you're giving life to something based on putting yourself out there. And I think that the curtain is really picking up on that. And if you look at also the way he painted her 90s, I don't know what you would call that, right? The undergarment that she's wearing. Yeah, but it's not big enough, right, for a petticoat. But yeah, a slip, right? So it seems almost as if it's been ravaged and torn at the top. I mean, there's little pink areas, but they're still kind of shattered looking through its bodice, It's really got some creepy overtones, doesn't it? And again, if you think about this idea, I'll get the second piece, so let me finish this idea. If we think about this idea that he's really channeling what Nietzsche said about how we are destined to transcend contemporary evolutionary states to something greater. It's almost like he's putting himself out there as part of his body. He's too big to even sit on the canvas, He breaks the border down below. His foot doesn't fit in. His head doesn't. He looms bigger than art itself, He's become the Superman, right? Yeah, directly in front of us. I had Demetrius first in the forward. Yeah, go ahead, Demetrius. Exactly right. If you think about the 2D arrangement of forms, right, the two-dimensional arrangement of forms, then he could be holding his brush like this, he could be holding his brush like this, but he's not just holding it right in front of and you're aware of what's underneath that robe. He makes you aware of it. So, absolutely. The brush as male extension, right? Yeah. You have to stick up just a little bit. Just what? Yes, exactly right. I think that's totally it. The idea of deflowering at least, right? And I mean, I say race because I find there's something violent about the picture, maybe just the colors and whatnot. But regardless, it's certainly, I think, about sex and deflowering, right? Sex and the loss of virginity. And again, go back to these metaphors for the painter's practice, right? You start with a pure white canvas. And your action turns it into something beautiful. And isn't that sort of the male fantasy? That, young women become beautiful, mature women because we've had our way. It's not a fantasy I share, but it is a traditional male fantasy. That, now you're a woman, right? And if you transplant that to the idea of painting, you start with the virginal white canvas, right? And you move toward making it something that it wouldn't be if you didn't do that, right? And again, this is all from the male point of view. To each his own, I was here with that chromosome. But it's all from the male point of view on this, right? And certainly would make an interesting juxtaposition with like Katie Kollwitz, who approaches the making of art not necessarily with Pinot-centric sort of approach to it. Amanda?
I was going to say, going back to the sexual undertone, it's almost poetic, in a way, kind of like you walked in on something you didn't want to walk in on.
Yeah. Let me show you one other thing here while I'm doing this, because I think this is an important comparison for this idea of how it might look otherwise, right? What are some ways in which you might otherwise see it? I'm going to show you this compared to an early Matisse before I get to the Fauve, okay? So let me just grab that. 20th century, Matisse, Carmelina, where is she? There she is. Okay. Now this is in your textbook. Hang on, let me just get this here. And I think that there's something going on here in the dialogue between the two of them. So this is called Carmelina, and it's based on the same theme, where we see the artist painting in the studio. And this is 1902 or so. So this is 4 years before the Fauve movement. This is what Matisse was doing early on. And I'll have a 10-minute art fix that sort of gets Matisse up to the Fauve, so you can see. He'd come out of the sculpture studio working with Rodin in the sculpture studio. And his figures are much more sculptural, three-dimensional, right? Very unlike the Fauve works in the fact that they seem to have chiaroscuro, right? They seem to exist as modeled three-dimensional forms with a physical presence. And he's seated there in a very similar pose, which I think is too freaking close for Kürtner not to know. You look at the pose of the model in these two things, right? And very similar. And there's Matisse in the mirror behind her, right? Reflected, looking off to the street, looking at her, but you can see he's practicing off to the side, right? He's busy painting. And what a difference it makes, because for Matisse, you see where he's gone, is he's smaller, right? He doesn't occupy all of it. He occupies a small space and in a reflection in the mirror. And the model is first and foremost for him, right? And for Kürtner, it's about him, isn't it? It's really about his presence and his power and his domination in the scene. So while there's no proof whatsoever that there's any kind of race going on, for me, I just went to that because of the violence of the color juxtapositions, these little bits where he's holding that brush almost like a knife as well. There's something about it that's just really kind of oddly stalking and violent, right? Yeah, doesn't he though? I mean, he's got that look on his face. I'm okay with what I've done. Yeah, nor her for that matter, really. But also, I think the other thing that makes it sort of, I mean, okay, look at her. She's wearing stockings still, right? If we take that color to be realistic on some level, she's certainly still wearing stockings. that right? Do you buy that? Or are her legs just colored a different color? It's hard to say, but it's close. I mean, if they were black stockings, it'd be much easier to figure that out. Right? But compared to the color of her arms and shoulders. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm looking at also, but I'm also looking at those red, pinkish red bits on her forehead and cheeks. Right? Yeah, and I've not seen this in person. Right? Where is this thing? In Hamburg. I've never been to Hamburg. Right? I got this off the web. It's a really nice picture off the web, but I don't know if the colors are, if this is it. You know what I mean? So what you're mentioning there is that the bottom is darker than the top. Certainly, it is. Whether that's reality or a digital aberration, I can't tell you. Right? So it could well be her legs, but I was just thinking about that idea of her in the background, the difference in their two faces, right? That if you look at how he's colored his face, it's all those oranges, those tangerine colors. And the only thing that's kind of color that we see on her face is his lips, which is pretty much the same pink he's using on her face as well. But there's something about that color on her face that either looks like, being heavily made up, or having been slapped up as well, like the red you get, from having been slapped around. And it just adds these little elements, or sort of like it's the trail of crumbs that's leading to something without actually saying it in so many words. I think it is all about ownership. And part of the Nietzschean idea of the Superman, right? The Übermensch, and those that will evolve further, those that are chosen to evolve further, is that they become leaders of society in sort of an ownership fashion, that they become the ones that are destined to lead and rule and govern, right? So the idea is about this, something that might be interpreted as ownership, I think, is absolutely in keeping with the ideas that drive Tobruka. Now, keep in mind that while the way that I'm presenting Tobruka is the bridge is deriding, and it's really easy to look at them as being like Kirchner as being kind of a creep, right? Keep in mind that one of his agendas is a sort of utopian agenda, that he wants society to move from where it is into something better and different. Okay? Sorry? Well, and that's the question. I mean, it's supposed to get us to the point where we can be, and understand that we have that potential, right? Now, in retrospect, knowing that these ideas were the same ideas that 20 years later in Germany go in very different directions. By the way, the Nazis hated him, right? He ended up being vilified by the Nazis to the point where I think he might have committed suicide after being rejected by the Nazis, Not that he wanted to be accepted, but the Nazis were really down on modern art. They saw this savagery and said this is not what art should be, and partly because, as you see from this discussion, once you start making academically trained art, which is pretty clear in its intentions, right? Then it becomes open to individual interpretation. And dictators don't like that, right? They want you to think the same thing as me. Same thing as me. We want all to think in lockstep. And so an art that opens up questions without resolving any answers is an art that doesn't work for someone who wants to be a totalitarian. Hang on a second. Who's doing Pollock? Who told me they were doing Pollock, right? This is one of those issues about what abstraction becomes a way of exercising individuality in the face of totalitarianism. Now, that's not what Kirchner's doing at this point. He's just, I think, a lot of people in the early 20th century began to see industrial progress. And this is the theme that we see in the 19th century. They began to see the modern world as being something that had lots of potential that was not yet being realized. And that there were a lot of people that were not benefiting from technological advances to social advances, and that they saw that their art had a way of opening eyes and minds towards new ideas to get us somewhere different. Is this better? It is if you're Kürtner, you know what I mean? It is if you're the artist, the male painter in this, then yes, it's a better place. You've expanded beyond your boundaries. You fill the frame. You extend beyond the frame. You control your world. Isn't that kind of what we all want on one level or another? Even if it's in microcosm, to have some control over what happens around us. You know, to the point where it doesn't attack us back. Do I sound like a fascist by saying that? Teacher, after all, I get to control this environment. Right? On a certain level. So is this a better area? Is this a better place? That's a good question in retrospect. Certainly thought it was going to be. Right? But you also saw that we were hindered from becoming as modern as our world. Because we hadn't recognized, based on Nietzsche, where we had come from so that we could get there. Now, who had their hand up? Somebody? Did someone? Okay. Very good. Well, he's not the only member of this group, right? Kürtner is the leader of die Gruppe, but there are other artists that are part of the group in Dresden, right? So it's not just a one-man show. And there are other artists that are working also in a consciously primitive style, an overtly expressive style, hoping again to move us beyond where we are to something better. And to what degree they share all of Kürtner's ideas is harder to say. And we'll come back to Kürtner because he's got an interesting sort of afterlife. But Ennio Moda was part of the group. And he joined die Gruppe in 1908, but he only lasted with them for about a year before he left. And as soon as he left die Gruppe, he began to do biblical subjects in a sort of die Gruppe style, which is to say, difficult, childlike, primitive, unacademic style. So here's Christ in red celebrating the Last Supper with his apostles. And it focuses on those individual faces in half-length figures, all of which appear not particularly handsome, not idealized at all, certainly not rendered with much in the way of three-dimensionality or chiaroscuro. I keep using that follows light and dark. But rather in bold colors that are juxtaposed in a way that is, again, intentionally difficult, intentionally non-aesthetic, with the idea that, again, you can shake yourself free from the world around you. So Nohl was famous for these biblical subjects, and was part of the group, and that only does these after having left the group. He's trying to focus on a sort of human reaction to the biblical theme. And I think many of our artists, Kürtner included, for all of the simplicity of the style and for all of the intentional, non-academic approach, they know the history of art and they know references to past works. So this wonderful Bosch in Ghent, where Christ is in the center carrying the cross and surrounded by his tormentors. There's except for Mary Magdalene in the lower left. Excuse me, for St. Veronica in the lower left. This idea of using these masks and deformities get you into something of the carnival nature of the event, but also a sort of fever dream kind of idea about this, that there's something that becomes slightly surreal about it. And then you end up focusing on the interplay of expressions between the different faces. If you look in the upper right corner of the Nolan, you figure in stark profile next to that green-faced man with the goatee. Right? And then look at some of the faces in the Bosch. You get the sense that he must have had some reference to this or some similar work. Maybe not this exact one, right? But some similar work where he's picked it up and then turned it into something different for them. We have only one or two Noldas in local collections. This is a watercolor of one of the apostles, and according to, I'm sorry, it's like blurry. According to the inscription, it's an apostle that's been filled with the Holy Spirit. So this is an apostle on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit fills the apostles with His presence, and they begin to speak in foreign tongues. They speak in other tongues, foreign languages. And you can see what He's done here is, again, to sort of focus on that clear-eyed, ecstatic, religious, visionary state. And I think here with the Last Supper, we're sort of in the same sense. Christ is in ecstasy in the middle of this. As the apostles are hearing the words He says, which is, one of you is going to betray me, and they're all thinking toward the future. They're all having this vision. Now, what's fascinating about these works is that He began to paint these biblical scenes. He said, He had some writings from those, and what He said was that He started drinking these biblical scenes after He drank some water that was tainted, like Flint, Michigan water or something like that. Right? He drank some water that was tainted. He felt deathly sick, like ran a fever for like a week and was retching all the time and nearly died from having drank poisoned water. Right? And at that point, he starts to move to these biblical scenes. Right? And he's not particularly religious himself. It's not something that he really cares about that much. He said that he was trying to represent this sort of pure spirituality, not theology, not Christianity, but using it as his touchstone to represent something more universal. And I think this is what ties him, even after he's left the Bruca group, this is what ties him to Kirchner. Kirchner, by going savage on us, right, he's trying to find that thing that we share. That primal character that we all evolved from, or devolved from, right, that we all came from at some point. And I think Nolda is looking for the same thing. Nolda is also looking for something that is universal, that we can focus on, that we can understand maybe that there's something else out there beyond what we see in the world around you. He said that I'm trying to represent a people moved by the spirit of religion. Right? And what's interesting with both of these, the idea that he begins to paint these when he's suffering fever, right? And delirious and poisoned and dying, is that the Last Supper is a scene of drinking, isn't it? Drinking for salvation. Being filled with the Holy Spirit, you have something inside of you that you have no control over. Right? That's causing your body to do things that you can't account for. These both have a very close reference to the idea of having been poisoned, right? Having polluted your body with something that's changing what it does and that you have no control over whatsoever. So he doesn't want to paint the Bible per se, but he's using it sort of as this inroad. Another founding member of the Bruca is Max Pechstein. And you can see, I don't think I need to belabor the point, how it owes some elements back to the Fauves, but really doesn't end up looking like Fauves works per se. Right? Same bright colors applied in a non-academic way, describing without doing so in a seemingly sophisticated manner. This one's down in Richmond, right, VMFA. We haven't seen many of these. That's the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, which, by the way, you live in Virginia, you're paying for it, it's free, right? So go see it. You've already paid for it, right? 3 cents out of your tax dollar goes there. Maybe more like 1, but still it's worth it, right? Pechstein, it actually spent some time in Paris and actually met some of the folks in person. So there certainly is a very direct causal connection, right? It's not just that it's coincidence, but rather we do know that a number of our group of members have actually been to Paris and met these people. And in fact, Pechstein persuaded one of the Fauves, Keith van Bonen, from Holland, was a member of the Fauves, and he convinced him to come on over and join the Bruca instead, move in this direction. So down at the National Gallery is this Kate Mendonca image of a young woman, and again, channeling many, not all, but many of the Bruca hallmark signature style that they have. Pechstein was the first of Die Brucke to move to Berlin. Remember, it started in Dresden, right? And in 1908, Pechstein moves from Dresden to Berlin. And when he gets there, he continues to recruit other artists to join the group. And one of these is Otto Müller, who he met in Berlin in 1910, and turned Müller on to this idea of being consciously primitive, of being consciously unacademic. And for Müller, even though the figures are much more hard-edged and angular than either Pechstein or Kirchner, it still, and the colors are not nearly so lurid. It still shares that idea of trying to reach way, way back in time to something primal, something original, something that we all share. And the picture becomes something kind of evocative in a way, almost like Eve in the Garden of Eden. And these are the same ideas, right, that Matisse was trafficking in. When we looked at Luke's Calm et Volupté, or The Joy of Life, he too is looking all the way back and trying to find some experience that is common to all humanity. But there's something different about it. I think, the Bruca group is not particularly joyful. They want to recognize it, but not celebrate it in the same way that Matisse did. So we have our artists, Pechstein in particular, moving to Berlin. Kirchner joins them as well in 1911, moves to Berlin too. And as the group moves to Berlin, they begin to splinter apart. When Kirchner founded Die Brucke in 1908, they were a very, very tight-knit group. They hung out together, they traveled together, they functioned more like a family than a group of artists. They would meet in Kirchner's studio. We have numerous paintings that show the same model by different artists. They were really working together with great tight unity, right? And as they move to Berlin, to this major metropolis, they start to splinter apart. It really is the end of the group that breaks up finally entirely in 1913. But I wanted to look at Kirchner's work in Berlin kind of briefly. Here's a Kirchner of Otto Müller with his wife Maschka. Sorry, I got a typo there. There should be an H after the C. Maschka. With Otto and Maschka Müller in the studio. Kirchner still painting in his lurid colors, but here they are sitting there in the studio. So it's still part of the group, and Kirchner joins them, moving up there from Dresden. On arriving in Berlin, he continues a theme that he'd begun in Dresden, which are scenes of people on the street, crowding the sidewalks of the street. So he's very much interested in the crowding of the metropolitan city. This is a fascinating image because there's more here than meets the eye to begin with. So you'll notice as we look, dominated by those two women in the foreground, right? And you'll notice that the style has become more angular. He's seen Cubism. That's what makes the change, and we'll talk about that when we get to Cubism. He's finally seen the angularity of Cubism. These two women are walking up the street. And you'll notice that they're just surrounded by men. Right? And other things. Off the right shoulder of the woman in mauve, right to your left, is an automobile. You can see the tires and even though the colors are extraordinary, right? There's those pinks that Kirchner likes, those blues and reds, but there's the front grille of an automobile moving down the middle of the street. So the figures in the background with the white faces are missing in the street and walking on the opposite sidewalk. But again, consciously trying to violate the rules of perspective, right? The rules that would make it work as a three-dimensional object or a three-dimensional subject, and really moving in a very different direction. Who are these women? How do you know? Yeah, the woman with the red hair, right? Which seems to be, I mean, granted his tones are never accurate, but that amazing red dude is looking at that fellow as she walks by him, right? The other one crowded next to her, and you're suggesting that he's sort of pretending to look away?
I think he's trying to, like,
avoid. Do you think does everybody think that's the case? Or whatever that is. Look, I guess probably a shop window that he's looking through, right? Since the street's behind us on the left and there's a car, what's on the right is going to be the public face of these major buildings, right? So think like a shop, first floor shop window. It's rarely, and it tips off to the side. But Tracy, you said no. Why do you think that he's not entirely disinterested? Yeah. And here, for this, we have to transport ourselves back into a different, like what we did last semester talking about 19th century art, still true in early 20th century Berlin, which is to be even two women together unaccompanied on the street puts you into a very particular realm, right? And that realm is one of a woman for hire. A male escort's a different thing. Demetrius, are you raising your hand? Right. And I think you talked about the placement of his brush, right? That she's almost got her hand sort of there as well, which almost makes it look like she might be based on an old Venus statue or something along those lines. Right? One of the things that this is at MoMA, right? And there's a nice little 3-minute web thing where the curator of MoMA talks about it. And one of the things that she pointed to, which I think once you see it becomes kind of obvious, look what he's doing with his cane. And again, the cane is like the pipe, right? But he's got it back behind him quite a ways. So it's laying there like he doesn't really care, but he's got his cane out there almost as if it's going to brush him. Maybe a word, or at least knock him a bit, so he has a reason to turn around, right? And yeah, and in fact, they kind of walked around it. So there's something about him that says that he's looking at him and he knows what he's been up to, right? And so you try to trip us up, so you're obviously the next target, right? And the other people, notice it's all about the stairs, all those eyes. Right? It's all about they're being looked at. I think that's the other way we could talk about who they are, is they are out there to be looked at, and they're successfully being looked at. Right? Now, it is quite images of prostitutes in Berlin, and if you think about its agenda, going back to group is to see our primalness beneath the finery and refinement of modern life. But what prostitutes on the street, isn't that a perfect example? All dressed up, but really the whole thing is about being an animal, right? It's about sex for sex's sake. It's not about relationships. It's not about humanism. It's about something really much more animalistic almost beneath that surface. And so I think for him, prostitutes become a very important metaphor. And he does this a number of different times. Down we have this pastel work down at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts where it's labeled to prostitutes, right? Where he did numerous sketches of them when he was out, catching them as they arch their backs, throw their shoulders back, and prowl for possible mates, possible tricks, right? So I think in many ways, when we think about him using prostitutes, I think it fits with what he's been doing all along, right? Which is trying to use his art not just for aesthetics, but as a way of encouraging the world around him to look at themselves in a different way, and for himself to use that as a way of pushing beyond where we are now to something that he sees to be better. You don't have to agree, you don't have to like it, but I think it's really kind of a fascinating idea, right? that art can have that power. And we don't often think about that we can make something that can make people see everything differently. And sometimes to do that, you just got to shake them, at the boots, right? To get them to the point where they do see things differently. Break them up by making something that's just radically different from what you're looking at. And again, remember that he had trained as an engineer to begin with. So I wonder if on a certain level he's not embracing and exploiting what was in fact just an artistic shortcoming to begin with, Like he really wasn't very good. And why not use that for something else? Right? I had a student many years back who really just couldn't draw the figure. I said, why don't you just make that yours? Stop trying to draw it. Well, start drawing the God like you draw it. Make it yours. Embrace. Make a strength out of what isn't working, Make lemonade out of the lemons, right? It's the old adage. Yeah. I have one last partner for him. He served in World War I. He was enlisted in 1914 in World War I. Mandatory enlistment for German nationals, right? And anybody who was living in Germany would have had to leave as well, right? So there were a lot of artists that migrated there. Kandinsky, for example, had to leave because of the war. And Kirchner served at the front, and a lot of our German artists spent time at the front. And he was actually medically discharged because he had a mental breakdown. It's just, apparently, World War I, there's other things like Hemingway. World War I was just a nightmare. Trench warfare, mustard gas, hideous deformation, people losing body parts, right? And mustard gas is a neurological gas, right? And it's where we develop the gas mask to walk through it all. But if you didn't get it, you went crazy, And just horrifying. And also for people, World War I, because everybody was all gung-ho about the automobile, right? And the steamship. And the airplane, and this is going to be great. And what did World War II show us? Right? Airplane, mass killing machine. Cars become tanks. Boats become no aircraft carriers yet. Battleships. And all of this great technology that might be leading towards a utopian future just comes crashing down. Right? People realize that what have we done and why have we done it? Kirchner comes out this scarred. There's this amazing self-portrait of him with the modern saffron where he's missing a hand. And he didn't lose his hand or anything. He just saw that as his emotional scarring, like he couldn't paint anymore almost. And so we got this one missing out, 7 years after the end after his discharge. So 4 years after the end of World War II. He'd already spent time in a sanitarium. He'd gone to an asylum for a while because of his mental breakdown, or he just really got fed up. Somebody visited him in his studio in 1917, and they said what it was like to come and visit him. So if we think about this, right, there's a man, we presume maybe Kirchner, sitting on the little settee in the background, a woman with him walking across the paneled floor, a man coming up the stairs to meet them. And again, it's awkward spatially, right, as he's coming up to join them and visit. And there's almost a sense that the male figure in the background is bedridden. And very different from the Superman, right, the artist that we saw before. And I'm going to read you, it's a little long, it's worth reading, an account of somebody that actually visited in the studio in 1917. It has I found him sitting on a very low chair next to a small hot stove in a yellow-painted, sloping-roofed attic. Only with the help of a stick was he able to walk. Staggering around the room, a colorfully painted curtain concealed a large collection of paintings. When we began to look at them, he came alive. Together with me, he saw all his experiences drift by on canvas, and the small, timid-looking woman set aside what we had seen and brought a bottle of wine. He made short, explanatory remarks in a weary voice. Each picture had its own peculiar, colorful character. A great sadness was present in all of them. What I had previously found to be incomprehensible and unfinished now created the same delicate and sensitive impression as his personality. Everywhere a search for style, for psychological understanding of his figures. The most moving was a self-portrait in uniform with his right hand cut off. When I was leaving, I thought of Van Gogh's fate, and thought that it would be his as well, sooner or later. Only later will people understand and see how much he's contributed to painting. That could be this guy, coming up to see Turner, who's feeble at this point, really beaten down, and he's never going to become the Superman that he thought he would at the end of his life. And eventually, like I said, he did commit suicide in 1938. And what's horrifying in its way is that the next year, 1939, the year after he killed himself, 639 of his works were gathered up by the Nazis and burned. 600, and that's just part of a group, right? 25 of them went into the famous Degenerate Art Show. 600 more were burned up because they weren't seen as being art. By the same people who share the ideology that he feels is so oddly poetic justice, I guess.
Now, was that movie came from with the Nazis?
That movie with the Nazis.
No, there was.
Yeah, that one.
The American Press, they did all the, all the artists and
Yeah, the monument came from that, exactly. There was a really cool 60s movie about the two called The Train from Lancaster. But yes, exactly right. So those are the ones they destroyed modern art. And we'll talk more about this in some point, right? But the stuff that they kept was things like really good stuff, right? So old master paintings, right? They loved those. And Hitler had an idea that he was going to set up a museum of all the greatest art in the world, right? So he'd gone to, he took the Kent Alter piece, right? That was in the movie. There's numerous Renaissance works. He even liked the Impressionists, right? But anything after that was sort of off limits. But in 1937, there was the show of Degenerate Art, where he has a propaganda minister to gather up a bunch of art by these major German expressionists like Nolde, like Kirchner, like Pechstein, right? And others. And he purposely kind of mishung them with crooked and whatnot. And wall labels, instead of getting a professional wall label, the wall labels were graffiti on the walls, right? And it was supposed to show how bad German art was, modernism, right? And across town, there was a second show of great German art that opened at the same time. And everybody went to the Degenerate show. Because a lot of people realized that this might be our last chance to see this stuff. And indeed, it turned out to be, because so many of them were burned like piles of books as well. As they tried to control this art that challenges you. When art challenges you, you've got to think for yourself. I can't tell you everything about this. I don't know everything about it. I'm still learning something about it. But it challenges you to think. And once you start thinking, then, totalitarianism lost control of you. And this is why most totalitarian regimes really like realist art. Because it doesn't really give you a lot of leeway to think. It's still there. And nothing against realism. Right? But realistic art can proclaim their messages much more clearly without a lot of nuance or room for misinterpretation. Whereas things like this, you have to talk about why you even think it's any good at all. Or even if you do. And like I said, I still have trouble with Turner. He's not easy man to like. I think he's fascinating. I would never want one in my living room. You know? Everything they tell you in art therapy are the wrong colors to choose. You know? Baby food colors, right? Thrown together on the plate. They are very depressing, I think. And even that quote I read, there's something about this that's really kind of sad and depressing and jaded in a way, the view of the world, right? Are there joyful characters? What is the nice one? I didn't show you. I'm making a point of it. Keep in mind that, right, this is not a documentary. This is not even, I'm making a point about character. And I get to choose that as a teacher. I can say, so what kind of points do I want to make about it? Do I want to show you the happy, cheery character pictures just to make it, just make it? There's a wonderful line of ballerinas down in Richmond, all in pink and dancing. It's pretty cute this way, right? It's poorly painted, if you will, right? Unacademic, but yeah. You know, the ones that we have here are kind of bleak, you know, and a lot of characters sense that way. And I think the vast majority of it tends to be like this up here, difficult, as when you think about color combination. Just really difficult. You know, actually, that pink and blue from a more like something you feel like a Miami Dolphins football jersey or something like that. You know, to have that kind of stuff. But this thing here is just, it's hard, isn't it? It's just hard to look at because it's not, I don't know, it's not comfortable.
The 80s.
Yeah. You said you like it? Good. Good for you. I think that's terrific because it's, I mean, I also like the idea that I like art to come up and slap me in the face sometimes. You know what I mean? And not let me take things at face value and make me decide that if I decide I don't like it, I'd better come up with some good reasons why, right? And if I decide, I really never ever get into the bad art is not art argument. We often hear that, right? That's not art. Well, we don't say that about music, do we? That's not music. We rarely, I mean, sometimes it's okay. Industrial drone at first, right? And if you don't know what you're listening to, Lou Reed's Metal Machine is really difficult to listen to. People say that about The Rite of Spring. Stravinsky, which is right on the time. That's not really music. I don't buy into that. I think that we have to allow for, he's intending it as art. He's trying to make us see something in a different way. He's got a very strong and well thought through agenda. Thoroughly thought through. Well, not thoroughly thought through agenda. So, if he's embracing something about his world that isn't the way it should be, you know, embracing something about the way he approaches art that's intended to make us see that, then I think we need to talk about it. You know, I think it's worthwhile looking at. Yeah.
Looking at ground, let's do something from 10 years ahead of 1923.
And then, you're a bit ahead of us here in that we're going to look at expressionism. We're going to look at two more cases. One right away and one later after the war, right? Because we'll look at some people whose major part of the career was that. That's one. Georg Worth, Dick, are these group of artists that took their cue from the absolutely right. The one who started to paint the world around them in social injustice as they saw it. Now, I don't think Kierkegaard has that kind of social agenda to open people's eyes to social injustice. I don't think that's always true. I think what he wants us to do is to open our eyes to the fact that we're not as sophisticated as we think we are. Right. I think that's his eye-opening thing, that we're not all that. Right? So it's like saying, we're just not all that. Right? And that we have come somewhere, we've got somewhere to go. Look at the claw of the hands of that one. It's animal-like. You know, it looks like a talon rather than a hand. Well, and if you think about that, as he's going to grab his cane, right? Sometimes the pipe isn't just a pipe, right? So, yeah, I mean, influence that? Like I said, but you're right, Amanda, that does, in fact, look for, and even though the thing is an important touchstone for artists like Max Beckman, who really begin their career after the war. Okay, let's quickly start to set the stage for our next group of expressionists, which is exemplified by Kandinsky, also working in Germany at exactly the same time. Moved there a bit earlier. Vasily Kandinsky, you can probably tell from his name that he's Russian by birth, but he had moved to Munich in Germany. Remember that Germany does not have a single art center. Berlin is by far the largest city. Berlin is a metropolis, right? It is to Germany what New York is to America, the one single biggest city. But, unlike the New York metaphor, numerous smaller cities had major art scenes at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. So Kandinsky moves from Russia to Munich in 1896, end of the 19th century. And his whole reason for leaving Russia behind was, and Kandinsky wrote a lot, his main reason to leave Russia behind was that the art establishment in Russia was kind of frozen. It really wasn't going anywhere. He wanted more freedom to explore new and different ideas. And so he moves to Germany, begins to surround himself with a number of artists in Germany, and even establishes an artistic group to push modern art forward in Germany in 1896, right? And as we'll see, you can tell from the work on your left that Kandinsky is often credited with having created the very first fully abstract works without a recognizable subject. Right? What we'll do Friday is trace how he got there and figure out why he did that. It's a different form of expressionism, one that moves toward eventually being only expression and abandoning entirely any kind of reference to the visible world. But we'll also see that it's never really done. It still lurks about, right? So our work here on the right is a recognizable town just outside of Munich, a small rural village called Murnau. And he shows us some of the houses in Murnau, some of the hills, some of the clouds in the sky, and most recognizably a church tower, large medieval church tower on the right in Murnau. This is an important thing for Kandinsky, this choice of a particular theme, something unchanged, unspoiled rural village, and the medieval church tower there. What Kandinsky is looking for in art, and we'll see one of the reasons he moves abstract, is that he's trying to find spirituality in art. I think there's something very different from Kirchner. I think Kirchner wants us to evolve to this something else. But Kandinsky is focused more on a sort of a purer form of spirituality in art. In fact, he writes a book called Concerning the Spiritual in Art, which I think every artist should have. All about how color reflects the supernatural, the metaphysical, the spiritual world. Okay? And so for him, this rural village, unspoiled, closer to nature, and the medieval church tower become symbols. Symbols that really relate to this quest to find something within art that is itself spiritual. So first he turns to quasi-spiritual subject matter, right? A church, a tower, in a rural village. And later what he does, he abandons that. He maintains this quest for the things that he puts on the canvas to be things that lead you, the viewer, towards some greater spiritual understanding. And this, I think, is what makes him so great. Now, when I was sitting where you are, all those years ago, I hated this stuff. I freaking hated abstraction. I thought it was a chicken way of painting. So I didn't get it. And I think the bottom line is that we don't know what we like what we know. Once I started to understand Kandinsky, once I felt I started to get it, then I started to really like it. And now I think it's bold as well get out, and part of me thinks that because I could never pull it off. I could never abandon representation. I wasn't gutsy enough when I was a studio artist. I was never gutsy enough to get rid of representation. And I think that there's something really bold about that, because what are you left with? You and the medium, right? You and the paint. You and the surface. And man, if you don't have that relationship down, everybody's going to see right through you. There's no cute puppies to distract you. You know, there's no beautiful trees or sunsets to get away from the fact that you don't know what the hell you're doing with your medium, you know. It's really bold to move in that direction. Over in the Phillips, we have another view of Murnau, where you can still see the church tower as he's begun abstracted. Now he's just placing it from there, putting it in the deep rocky valley, and you can see that some of the forms that we saw before, such as the elves and the deer, have become significantly more abstract. Still some reference in the real world, still some sense of a, side of a lake, perhaps, right? Reflection in the lake and the mountains behind the sky above. But now he's taking steps toward getting away from what we see to the forms themselves. With the idea that it doesn't have to be a church site. It's something about that form of the canvas, like the Washington Monument, right? An obelisk form on the canvas. In itself, regardless of it being a church site, those lines, those colors, that arrangement has spiritual relevance. And in order to tease out what that spirituality is, he needs to back away. Like he needs to drop what it looks like. So when we see when we look at Kandinsky, as he moves, 1909, basically 1913, 4 years, really quick, right? Well, that's not time in college. In that short period of time, he makes these amazing strides, and he's repeating many of the same things over and over and over again, with the idea that every time he does it, he can strip a little bit more out of it, he can tear it away a bit more. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to get past the world, right? And rip open that curtain and see what, see the Wizard of Oz. He wants to see what's behind the curtain. And for him doing this, right, in the years leading up to World War I, and even through the 20s, a lot of it is that the world is chaotic, the world is a mess. The world isn't working the way that we thought it was going to at the end of the 19th century, when technology and everything looked like it's going to be a great new century. And it's not working out that way. What's behind the curtain? What's behind the chaos? Is there peace? Permanent. Something worth living for back there. And that's what he's looking for. And that's what makes Kandinsky's work, I think, some of the greatest things I've seen, is that he's pulling it apart and he's looking for that. This is art in a nutshell, right? It should show you something that you didn't see before when you look at that thing. Whether that thing is your canvas or whether that thing is whatever you represent on that canvas. Right? I should not be able to think about that anymore in the same way I did. Kandinsky wants us to peel it away, look at it, So here, as much as I like a snow day, as much as the next guy, I also wouldn't mind teaching this class. So here's something I just looked at and continue.
Like, have you ever seen something built in? Yeah.